An epidemic suddenly broke out on our wedding day and my boyfriend was quarantined. So we had to hold a special video wedding. At the moment of taking the oath, a woman in a bathrobe suddenly flashed across in front of the big screen. The guests at the scene were in an uproar. Did I see it wrong? Why is there another woman? Didn't the groom go back to the hotel to get something and was quarantined alone? I stared at the screen blankly, feeling cold from head to toe. I knew this woman. She was his ex-girlfriend. The wedding was about to start and just as the wedding car arrived at the scene, my soon-to-be husband, Asher, suddenly said that he needed to go back to the bridal chamber in the hotel to get something. Unexpectedly, an epidemic suddenly broke out in the hotel, and he was quarantined on the spot. After discussing with my family, I called Asher to tell him their proposal. A video wedding? On the phone, Asher's tone didn't show much fluctuation, but I could imagine him frowning over there. After being stunned for a while, I still told him my consideration. You'll have to go on a business trip to Beijing in a few days. If we postpone it again, I don't know when it will be. Most importantly, quite a few of your relatives and friends over there have taken leave to come here. Whatever you decide is fine. He hung up the phone quickly. I held my mobile phone and stood there in a daze. It seemed that it was always like this. Asher seldom let me finish what I wanted to say. The things I did for him were all insignificant trifles in his eyes. He wouldn't refuse my efforts, but he wouldn't give me any feedback either. It wasn't until the master of ceremonies walked over that I managed to force a smile and told him that the wedding would be held as usual. The music of I Believe slowly played, and finally, it was time for the oath-taking session. Mr. Asher, are you willing to marry Ms. Arya as your wife? As soon as the master of ceremonies finished speaking, everyone's eyes were focused on Asher on the big screen. In front of the camera, Asher was wearing a well-tailored black suit and was in the bridal chamber decorated in cool tones. He slightly lowered his head and didn't seem to be fully concentrating on looking at the camera. He seemed a bit absent-minded. After waiting for quite a while, when the master of ceremonies looked a bit embarrassed, he finally said, I am willing. The atmosphere at the scene immediately became lively. Suddenly, a woman wrapped in a bathrobe appeared in the picture. Her hair was wet and stuck to her body, her fair shoulders were exposed to the air, and her cheeks were flushed pink. She should have just taken a bath. The originally noisy wedding scene was quiet for a moment, and then there was an even louder discussion. There were all kinds of remarks in the crowd, and I just felt a dull pain in my head. Did I see it wrong? Why is there another woman? Maybe it's the groom's sister. Isn't the groom the only child? Where did the sister come from? I stared at the screen blankly, feeling cold from head to toe. This woman was Asher's ex-girlfriend. However, in response to this sudden change, the first thing Asher did was not to explain to me or the guests at the scene. Instead, he rushed towards that woman and quickly took off his coat to cover her. He took on the posture of a protector, trying his best to shield her from all kinds of speculations and unfriendly glances. On the screen, she was protected by him perfectly. Outside the screen, I was stabbed all over by various sympathetic and mocking glances. After a long while, Asher seemed to suddenly realize something and looked at the camera again. For the first time, a trace of panic appeared on his usually calm and self-possessed face. Arya, In the end, the wedding didn't take place. After explaining the reason to all the guests and sending red envelopes one by one to apologize, I calmly cancelled the wedding. Asher, who usually didn't even want to say a few more words to me, called me many times today to explain. Arya, there's really nothing between her and me. You said you were a bit cold. I thought the wedding venue wasn't far from the hotel where the bridal chamber was. I just wanted to drive back to get you a coat. I don't know how she came here either, and I don't know why it was such a coincidence that someone upstairs was diagnosed, and the whole hotel was quarantined on the spot. I didn't tell you just now because I was afraid you'd overthink it. But now all I could think of was the picture of him protecting her in his arms, and I just felt a dull pain in my heart. Really? Asher was silent for a long while before saying, it's really just an accident. What happened today was my fault, but getting married is a big thing. You shouldn't have canceled the wedding without discussing it with me either. He became more and more impatient as he spoke. Could it be that you really want to break up with me just because of this? Let me explain. A female voice came from the other end of the phone. It was his ex-girlfriend, Violet. You've misunderstood. She explained generously. I came here this time just to send my blessings to you too. I got a bit wet in the rain when I came, and then happened to be quarantined. I was worried about catching a cold, so I took a bath. I really didn't know that you were having a video wedding at that time. She seemed to chuckle softly over there, and her voice suddenly dropped deliberately. If I really wanted to get back together with him, you two wouldn't have come this far. Although it seemed like an inadvertent sentence, I could sense a hint of subtle and barely noticeable contempt in her tone. Asher and I met through a blind date. I didn't know at first that he had an unforgettable first love. The first time we met, we made an appointment at a quiet bar. Asher was holding a Go chess manual, which looked out of place in the bar. When I walked closer and took a look, I found that the chess manual he was reading was exactly the rare copy that I had been looking for a long time. Could you lend it to me for a few days? He smiled and asked, then how will you return it to me? I was stunned for a moment and then smiled too. Then let's exchange contact information, Mr. Asher. Later, as we got to know each other better, we were both surprised to find that we were surprisingly compatible with each other. So we naturally got together. The only drawback was that in almost 2 years of being together, he was always busy. Our relationship was so plain that it seemed both real and unreal. There were no quarrels, nor were there any exciting dates. I had always thought that adult love was probably like this. 2 months ago, Asher was so busy with work that he had a stomach hemorrhage and was hospitalized. I took my annual leave to take care of him for more than 10 days. I don't know if sick people are always vulnerable, but the way he looked at me became softer and softer. On the night before he was discharged from the hospital, I was helping him wipe his body. When I went to change the water, suddenly a warm embrace pressed against my back. Arya, let's get married. In the following 2 months, our relationship developed by leaps and bounds, as if we suddenly entered the honeymoon period. After being discharged from the hospital, I moved to his place. On the first night of living together, in the second half of the night, he carried me to the bathroom to take a shower. When the hot water poured on me, my legs went weak and I almost fell. He held me firmly and chuckled softly, "You smell so nice." My face instantly turned bright red. You changed the body wash, and I'm still not used to it." He smiled casually and said, "You'll get used to it." Not long after that, he took me to a gathering of his childhood friends for the first time. That was the first time I met his ex-girlfriend, Violet. She was very beautiful, with fair skin and had the kind of gentle and intellectual beauty. She also brought a man with her and introduced him very naturally, "This is my fiancé, whom I mentioned to you before." So she was getting married too. I subconsciously observed Asher's reaction and felt relieved when I saw that he looked calm. During the meal, Asher kept his head down and was helping me peel crabs. Violet's eyes seemed to have been sweeping over our side intentionally or unintentionally. One of his childhood friends couldn't help teasing, "Tisk, didn't you hate peeling crabs the most? In the past, when Violet asked you to peel them, you wouldn't do it even if you were threatened with death." After saying that, he realized it was inappropriate and nodded apologetically at me. Asher didn't reply. He just turned to me with a light smile and asked, "Why aren't you eating?" I silently stretched out my hand. Because I had taken a small bite of the crab, some small red dots appeared around my wrist. Then everyone understood. My boyfriend didn't know that I was allergic to seafood. Just then, Violet's fiancé happened to put a coriander ball into her bowl, and Asher immediately reminded loudly, "She can't eat coriander." The eagerness and worry in his voice were not concealed at all. The atmosphere froze for a moment. Everyone looked at him. Finally, Violet came to the rescue. "I'm indeed allergic to coriander. Thanks, old classmate. When we got home, we had the biggest quarrel since we got together. If you still like her, why did you propose to me? You remember that she's allergic to coriander, but we've been together for 2 years, and you don't even remember that I'm allergic to seafood. What do you think of me? Am I just something for you to pass the time? Or a tool to stimulate her? There was a strong sense of guilt in his eyes. Arya, I really like you. It won't happen again next time. He held my hand and looked at the red dots on my wrist with heartache. I forced myself to endure the bitterness in my heart, quickly pulled my hand out, wiped away my tears with the back of my hand, and saw his mobile phone suddenly light up. Violet, actually, I'm quite happy that you've thought it through and are willing to find a new girlfriend. By the time I realized it, he had already gotten up and gone to the balcony to smoke. The bright and dim red light at his fingertips lit up the impatience and gloom between his eyebrows. Now that I think about it, was he impatient because of our quarrel, or was he unhappy about Violet's seemingly indifferent attitude and couldn't bear that she really regarded him as an ordinary friend? Probably the latter. After coming back from the wedding venue, I hired a moving company and planned to move out of Asher's place. When I was cleaning up the study, I found a mobile phone in the hidden layer of a drawer. It was another mobile phone that Asher had hidden. Out of curiosity, I tried my birthday as the password, but it didn't work. Then I tried Violet's birthday, and it opened. In the WeChat contacts list of this mobile phone, there was only Violet. Just last night, Asher sent her a long message. Violet, I'm getting married tomorrow. I used to fantasize countless times about the scene of our wedding and our life after marriage. We were going to have 2 children. On the day you told me that you were going to marry someone else, I drank so much that I had a stomach hemorrhage and was hospitalized. Maybe it was revenge. I proposed to Arya. I let her use your body wash. Only by smelling the familiar scent at night can I fall asleep peacefully. Finally, I wish you a happy wedding. For a moment, my mind went blank. I even lost the ability to think. I slumped to the ground, and a suffocating feeling flooded over me like a tide. So he had a stomach hemorrhage because of Violet. So he proposed to me just for revenge. So every night when he was with me, he was missing his ex. The most ridiculous thing was that after Asher sent that message, Violet replied to him. She said, Asher, let's meet. And then there was the embarrassing scene at the wedding venue. I blocked all of Asher's contact information and temporarily moved to my father's place. That night, I had a high fever and was sick for a full 7 days. In a daze, I heard my stepmother scolding my father. She's not going to live here all the time, is she? What a nice kid Asher is. He even pulled some strings to help her younger brother get into the experimental junior high school not long ago. I don't know why she doesn't cherish it. Just like her deceased mother, she has no good fortune. After I felt a bit better, I started looking at houses online. My father came to bring me some fruits and after thinking for a moment, said, Asher has been unblocked and came to see me. He kept asking about you. I don't want to see him. Maybe what happened at the wedding was really just a misunderstanding. My father sighed and hesitated to say more. I paused as I was holding the mouse, then looked up and realized that a patch of my father's sideburns had turned white. Back then, he and my mother got to know each other through a blind date. Later, he succeeded in starting his business, but my mother fell ill and passed away when I was 3 years old. Then he married my stepmother, who was his first love. Soon, I found a house and moved in. But when I was tidying up my things at the company, I found that an important document was missing. I must have left it at Asher's place in a hurry when I left. After thinking about it, I asked for 2 hours off in the afternoon. It started to rain heavily on my way there. When I arrived at his house, I took a tumble and was in a really sorry state. In the corridor, 2 workers were carrying piles of luggage and big and small bags into the open door. Violet was standing beside them, gently directing them. There are my skincare products in there. Don't break them. Asher happened to come out and was slightly startled when he saw me. There was a smile in his voice as he said, Arya, you've finally come to see me. Before I could say anything, Violet walked over and explained with an open and innocent look on her face, don't misunderstand. I've run into some trouble and have nowhere to stay for the moment. I'll move out as soon as I find a place. I won't cause any trouble for you and Asher. When I got closer, I immediately saw the earring on her earlobe at a glance. The style was quite special with a black pearl in the middle. As it moved, it showed a bright peacock green luster. A few days before my birthday, and it also happened to be double 11, Asher accompanied me at home to watch a live stream on Taobao. The shopping guide took out a pair of black pearl earrings and said, "Among black pearls, the peacock green ones are the most special. This pair of earrings symbolizes giving them to the most precious person." At that time, I stared at the earrings in a daze. But when I saw the price, I hesitated. Meeting Asher's slightly pensive gaze beside me, I closed the live stream interface and said, "I don't like black pearls. Let's look at something else." Later, I found that pair of earrings in the drawer. Recently, due to the epidemic, Asher's company had lost several projects. I didn't expect that he still bought that pair of earrings for me. My heart skipped a beat. I closed the drawer and pretended that I hadn't found them. On my birthday, I closed my eyes to make a wish. Suddenly, something cold touched my earlobe. "Arya, happy birthday." Asher's voice had a bit of a smile, and his cool fingertips brushed against my skin. I blushed and went to look in the mirror, only to find that it was just an ordinary pair of earrings. My expectations gradually cooled down, but I never doubted him. I thought he wanted to give me a surprise on our wedding day. Unexpectedly, now they were on Violet's earlobes. Violet was the one he cherished the most. I ignored her and said coldly to Asher, "I've come to get something." Then I walked straight into the room and rummaged through the drawer on the console in the entrance hall for the document. My soaked clothes were clinging tightly to my body, and water was dripping down from the corners of my clothes. I couldn't help shivering. Asher took out the file bag from another drawer and handed it to me. After looking at me for a moment, he asked, "Did you get caught in the rain?" As soon as he finished speaking, Violet came out of the kitchen with a bowl of hot soup on a plate, with a big smile on her face. What a coincidence! Just now when I went to move my luggage, it suddenly started to rain heavily. Asher cooked ginger soup for me at home. Later, he was still worried and drove to pick me up in person. "Now that I don't need it, this bowl of ginger soup is just right for you to drink." With that, Violet suddenly reached out to pull me. I subconsciously dodged, but sprained my ankle. I quickly supported myself on the table with my hand. However, my wrist was scratched by the corner of the table, and a little blood oozed out. Violet on the opposite side also staggered and was about to fall. A worker beside her casually supported her by the waist, and the two of them were almost hugging each other. With a crash, the bowl broke, and the ginger soup spilled all over the floor. Asher heard the noise and looked over, and his face immediately darkened. He yanked Violet out of the worker's arms. The worker was given a cold look by Asher and immediately said, "Your girlfriend almost fell just now, so I helped her." Then he muttered, "How much do you love your girlfriend? You're so jealous." Asher didn't explain anything. He turned to ask Violet, "Are you okay?" Violet shook her head, her eyes sweeping over the ginger soup on the floor. Asher then looked at me and said, "She was just being kind." "Just because she's kind, do I have to accept it?" The pain in my wrist suddenly intensified, and I couldn't help but say sarcastically in the end, "Now I'm kind enough to ask her to drink the ginger soup spilled on the floor. Don't waste it. Is she going to do it?" I pointed at the mess on the floor and said with a smile to Violet, "Aren't you feeling sorry for it? Go ahead and drink it." Violet's face turned pale, looking as if she was about to cry from being wronged. I wasn't interested in whether she was really innocent or just pretending. I turned around and left. Suddenly, Asher grabbed my wrist. His eyes fell on the scratch on my wrist. "How did you get hurt?" Slap. I used all my strength without holding back. The man in front of me took a few steps back. In less than 2 seconds, the palm print appeared on his face. "Don't touch me. You make me sick," Violet exclaimed, and the two workers couldn't help but cast curious glances. I clutched the file bag tightly. Before I had taken 2 steps, Asher suddenly grabbed my arm, kicked open the bedroom door, and dragged me straight in. His actions were so forceful and unexpected. "Asher!" The door was slammed shut, blocking out Violet's somewhat uneasy voice outside. Before I could react, my body sank into the soft quilt. Arya, let's have a good talk. Outside the room, Violet was still persistently knocking on the door. I propped myself up on the quilt with my hands. The faint familiar fragrance on the bed filled my nostrils. It was the smell of the body wash that Asher asked me to use every night. It was also the smell on Violet. A strong sense of shame hit me. I looked at him and couldn't help but sneer. What do you want to talk about? Talk about what a scumbag you are. Asher didn't answer. Instead, he took out a pack of cotton swabs and iodine from the bedside table. Let me help you deal with the wound first. I struggled hard but couldn't break free. I know you're still angry with me, but nothing really happened between Violet and me. You don't have to be angry with yourself over something that didn't happen. I looked at his calm face and suddenly realized that he didn't know that I had already found that mobile phone. He thought that I was just having a little spat with him. When I was extremely angry, I somehow calmed down instead. Suddenly, I remembered that half a year ago, during Asher's business trip to Shanghai, there were several incidents of stalking and harassment in our community, and the perpetrator hadn't been caught. In the middle of the night, I was half asleep when I suddenly heard the sound of someone unlocking the door. I woke up with a start, trembling. I took out my phone and called Asher. Arya, don't panic first. Have you called the police? There was the sound of rustling clothes on the other end of the phone. His calm voice made my fear subside a little. I followed his instructions step by step. 10 minutes later, there seemed to be no more noise outside the door. Maybe I heard it wrong, I said. He laughed on the phone and said, it's good that you're okay. Later, I went back to sleep. In a half-awake and half-asleep state, I seemed to smell Asher's scent. When I opened my eyes, it was really him. I threw myself at him in surprise and hugged him. Didn't you say you'd be on a business trip for 5 days? What about the companies? I'll stay with you these days, he said, resting his chin on my neck and hugging me tightly. Arya, I know you're scared. I thought that even though we got to know each other through a blind date and didn't have an emotional foundation at first, in the past 2 years, we had similar values and got along well. I had always been devoted to him. I thought he liked me too. But it seemed that it was just what I thought. Asher lowered his eyelids and gently applied iodine to my wound with a cotton swab. You've blocked me for so many days. Haven't you calmed down yet? I pulled my thoughts back from my memories and said, we've already broken up. He paused for a moment and his movements became even lighter. Later, Violet and I weren't quarantined in the same room. I explained the situation to the epidemic prevention staff, and they arranged for us to be quarantined separately. Today, I asked Violet to move in. She broke up with her fiancé, and that man kept harassing her. She had no choice but to move. She'll just stay here for a couple of days. I'll be staying at the company these days and working on projects with my colleagues in the department. I won't live with her. You can check all of this. He stared at me closely. Seeing that I didn't react at all, his face darkened a little. She and I are really in the past. Really? I calmly opened my phone, found the screenshot of the text message he sent to Violet, and showed it to him. On our anniversary, I called you countless times. You said you were at a business dinner, but actually it was because Violet was getting married. You got drunk in a bar and finally had a stomach hemorrhage and were hospitalized. Is that right? Did you propose to me just to take revenge on her for getting married? Did you two make an appointment to meet in our wedding room that night? Asher's face turned ashen. If you can't let go of each other, why did you involve me? Is it so fulfilling for you to play with someone's true feelings? I didn't want to look at him again. I reached for the doorknob. Behind me, I heard Asher's voice. Believe it or not, I sent that text message to her when I was drunk. When I woke up, I already regretted it. That day in the wedding room, I didn't do anything to betray you with her. I proposed to you, and it wasn't for revenge. 2 days later, my best friend sent me a message saying that she had something to tell me. If I had a little bit of a change of heart towards Asher because of what he said that day, then now, that bit of change had completely disappeared. All that was left was disgust. In front of me was a wedding car. It was the car that Asher drove to the wedding room that day. My best friend held my hand and her eyes fell on the thing wrapped in tissues in the car. Because he was quarantined at that time, this car had been left at the hotel. Later, I asked someone to wash the car and found that, in the crack of the seat. This is a new car. Only Asher drove it that day. My best friend's voice was very soft, but each word hit my heart like a heavy weight. I went to check the surveillance at the hotel. That day, Asher and Violet got out of the car together. So they didn't stay in the wedding room that day. They couldn't resist each other in the car. A dense sense of throbbing pain spread outwards from my chest, and everything in front of me became blurred. Suddenly, I lost consciousness. When I woke up again, the glaring lights were the first thing that came into my view, and the pungent smell of disinfectant filled the air. Arya, you're awake. My best friend helped me sit up. How are you feeling? I keenly sensed that there was something strange about my best friend's voice, so strange that it made me feel a bit uneasy. What's wrong with me? My best friend looked at me with a complicated expression and sighed heavily. You're pregnant. I'm pregnant? God really loves playing jokes. Just when I had made up my mind to break up with Asher, I was carrying his child. Arya, what are you going to do? I slowly raised my head, and the events of these days kept flashing through my mind. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon, I was sitting quietly in the hospital corridor, touching my flat belly with a blank expression. I was waiting for the abortion surgery. Arya? A familiar voice rang in my ears. I looked up blankly. Not far away, Asher was helping the pale-faced Violet, and they were both looking at me. When our eyes met, he froze. Then he strode towards me. After seeing the form in my hand, his body suddenly stiffened, and a complex look that seemed to be a mixture of surprise and confusion flashed in his eyes. You're... His gaze moved down and landed on the form that I was still tightly clutching and hadn't had time to put away yet. The joy was replaced by anger. You're going to have an abortion? The next moment, a heavy slap landed hard on my face. The pain clearly came from my face, and my whole face was burning with pain. I was dazed for a moment. Arya. Asher called me helplessly, and a hint of panic flashed in his eyes. I just think that you shouldn't abort the child without discussing it with me. I didn't mean to, he hurriedly explained, but before he could finish, he was interrupted by a sudden slap. Asshole, go to hell. My best friend walked over at some point. Her palm was still trembling from the force, and her eyes were red with anger. How dare you say such a thing? Arya has already broken up with you. She has nothing to do with you now. You have no right to interfere in any of her decisions. I didn't agree to the breakup. Asher's gloomy eyes stared at me unblinkingly. Arya, I've said that there's really nothing between Violet and me. On the wedding day, you and Violet didn't make an appointment to meet in the bridal chamber. Instead, you drove to the bridal chamber together. I interrupted him and coldly stated the fact. You had sex in the car, didn't you? Asher's face instantly turned pale. I sneered, if you hadn't been quarantined suddenly, would you have continued in our bridal chamber? I couldn't bring myself to say the rest. It was too disgusting. Arya, do I have to see you two having sex with my own eyes before you'll admit it? Asher's face grew paler and paler, and his lips kept trembling, but he couldn't say a word. Looking at the defeated and helpless face in front of me, an indescribable sense of sadness welled up in my heart. My father was like this, and so was he. Back then, when my mother was diagnosed with stomach cancer, on our wedding anniversary, she was so weak that she couldn't even hold a kitchen knife, but she still cooked a lot of dishes that my father and I loved, just like in previous years. She also put on makeup for herself and dressed me up nicely. And that day, my father used the excuse of working overtime to go and meet his first love. At that time, my mother looked at the photos sent by his secretary, remained silent for a long time, touched my head, and said blankly, "Who will love my Arya in the future?" For more than 20 years, I had always known that my father didn't love me enough. His heart was so small. Most of it was given to his first love that he got back after losing her and to his son that they finally had. Only a little was left for me. Later, I met Asher. He had once sternly scolded my younger brother, who sprayed water guns at my face as soon as he entered the door, carefully wiped the water stains on my face with a tissue, and said to my brother with a solemn face, "Apologize to your sister." He also once carefully swept the dust off my mother's tombstone, held my hand, and promised her, "I'll take good care of Arya for you in the future." However, the same beginning, the same result. I won't keep this child. I'm not discussing it with you. I'm just telling you my decision. As soon as I finished speaking, Violet, who was beside Asher, walked a few steps towards me. "Arya, Asher and I are sorry for what happened to you, but that day, we didn't expect that to happen either. We just couldn't help ourselves." "Couldn't help yourselves?" My best friend looked sarcastic. "A dog eating shit really can't help itself." Violet's expression froze slightly and she seemed to get angry too. "Arya, are all your friends so ill-mannered?" I glanced at her, held my best friend's hand, and said, "Good manners are for decent people." "Exactly." My best friend smiled and echoed me. "On the surface, you look clean, but behind others' backs, you hook up with other people's boyfriends. What's the difference between this behavior and that of an animal?" "Yes, I'm naming names. You, an animal." Violet's fair cheeks flushed red and she subconsciously looked at Asher. Seeing that he was just staring blankly at me and didn't speak up for her as he usually did, she was stunned. The door of the operating room opened and the nurse called my name with a notebook in hand. The veins on Asher's forehead seemed about to burst and his eyes were red as he pleaded, "Arya, don't. Arya, don't be afraid. I'll be waiting outside for you all the time." My best friend held my hand. The white lights in the corridor were very bright, making people feel a bit dazed. Their voices echoed in my ears from both sides. I looked at Asher and said, "Come here." He was stunned for a moment and a hint of disbelief and joy flashed in his eyes. Then he obediently walked over. The next second, I raised my palm. A crisp sound echoed in the silent corridor. His face was slapped to one side and a blood stain slanted across his cold white cheek from his eyebrow bone, and blood beads quickly oozed out. Payback for that slap. After saying that, I straightened my back and walked in without hesitation. Behind me, Asher called my name in a low, hoarse voice full of pleading. I didn't look back. During this month, as soon as my best friend got off work, she would bring me the fish soup she had cooked. "That guy has been standing downstairs at your place for 10 days. My best friend stuffed a grape into my mouth. "He even sleeps in his car at night." It's as if he wasn't the one who sent ambiguous text messages to his ex-girlfriend on the night before the wedding and had an affair with her on the wedding day. The most ridiculous thing is that there are 2 girls in the community who are interested in him and often take the initiative to strike up a conversation with him. TSK. My expression didn't change at all and I kept typing on the computer. My best friend looked at me carefully for a moment and then asked, "Are you really leaving?" There was an application form on the computer. If it was successful, I would be transferred to the Suzhou branch. Suzhou was my mother's hometown and also the place where she was buried. "Not coming back?" My best friend squinted at me as if she was grinding her teeth. I smiled. "Since you're here, of course I'll come back to see you." Only then was my best friend satisfied and fed me another grape. The next day, my best friend told me something, laughing so hard that she could hardly stand upright. "Those 2 girls are plainclothes police officers. There have been stalking and harassment incidents in the community where you live recently. The 2 of them have been observing Asher for several days. They took him back to the police station for interrogation last night, and he was only released this morning. However, he's quite persistent. Even though he was regarded as a harasser, he rushed over here as soon as he was released, for fear that you might think he had left." My best friend paused for a moment. "Or maybe he was afraid that if you changed your mind, he wouldn't be able to show up in front of you immediately. It's so meaningless." My best friend's voice grew lower and lower. "What's the use of belated affection?" I remained expressionless and continued to pack my things for going to Suzhou. I spent the whole night packing and a big box was filled with garbage. At 4 o'clock in the morning, I put on a long windbreaker and went downstairs with the cardboard box to throw away the garbage. The sky was as dark as if it had been splashed with ink. The outdoor temperature was a bit low and the street lamps in the community emitted a slightly dim and pale white light. A familiar figure was standing under the street lamp. His tall and thin shadow was stretched very long. Adia. I lifted my eyelids without any emotional fluctuation. Do I need to call the security guard to ask you to leave? I know you don't want to see me. I heard from others that there has been a harasser in your community recently. I was worried that you'd be as scared as last time, so I've been staying here. I didn't expect to be mistaken for the harasser. He gave a low, bitter laugh. It's really ridiculous, isn't it? I was slightly stunned that he took a step forward, took out a packaging box from the car, and opened it. Inside was a chess manual. Some time ago, you always stayed up very late. I thought you were working on a project. Just yesterday, I found this chess manual and realized that you had been competing with people online at that time, and this was the prize, right? You knew that I had always wanted this, so you wanted to give it to me as a birthday gift, right? Suddenly, he held my hand, then hesitated for a moment, as if he wanted to touch my face. I just looked at him indifferently. His hand suddenly froze and then he slowly let go. After a long while, he finally began with difficulty. Every word was filled with hoarseness and bitterness. I regret it. After you had the operation that day, Violet mentioned getting back together with me. At that moment, your face was the first thing that popped into my mind. I refused her. I smiled without any sarcasm, unusually calm. And then? Asher's face turned a few shades paler. Before, I thought that the person I truly loved in my heart was Violet and that I still couldn't forget her. So I allowed myself to have contact with her and sent her that text message on the night before the wedding. Arya, I really regret it. So, you suddenly realize that you're in love with me now? I asked him. You regret it, so I'm supposed to accept you, right? I indifferently withdrew my gaze, threw the cardboard box on the ground, along with the chess manual.
Oh, you've lost a lot of weight. Moronlan, hearing the noise, came out and was overjoyed to see her beloved grandson back. Following her was Su Jing Tian, who was always leaned on his cane. Good. Su Jing Tian glanced at Su Chen and nodded in approval. That's very rare indeed. Although the old man appeared calm, his heart was filled with excitement.
On the day before I was about to leave, I saw a moment's post from my father's family celebrating their wedding anniversary. I love my family. I in the photo, the candlelight was flickering. My stepmother was sitting in the middle, carrying a designer handbag. On the left was her husband, looking at her with a smile, and on the right was their son, eating cake with an innocent look. Having lived a life of luxury for more than 20 years, she took good care of her skin. I almost forgot that she was actually a few years older than my mother. The year my mother passed away, she was so emaciated that she had lost all her hair. Her body was connected to all kinds of medical instruments, and it was painful just to look at her. Yet she still managed to smile at me and said, Arya, don't be afraid. I impassively gave a like to this WeChat Moments post. Immediately, my father sent me a private message. Are you going back to Suzhou? He used the word, going back. Me, yes. It took my father a while to reply, have a safe journey. The flight was at 7 in the evening. After saying goodbye to my best friend, there was still an hour left. I received a text message, I'm Violet. I'm waiting for you in the cafe beside the airport. After thinking for a long time, I still went there. The cafes near the airport were always crowded with people coming and going. Violet was sitting quietly alone in the corner, and I walked over. You must be feeling pretty smug. After a moment of silence, Violet suddenly smiled, a rather forced smile. I stirred my coffee and didn't say anything. Do you know why Asher and I broke up? She didn't seem to need my answer. Because we weren't suitable for each other. I insisted on not having children, but his family wanted a child. It was as simple as that. I looked at her calmly. I love Asher, but I wouldn't go against my principles for him, so I broke up with him. We hadn't contacted each other in these years. I thought I would get over it. Until he got a new girlfriend, which is you. I curled my lips sarcastically. Violet also smiled faintly. So I took the initiative to contact him, and sure enough, he hadn't forgotten me. He even bought another mobile phone on purpose to keep in touch with me. The night before your wedding, he sent me that message. He actually said that he proposed to you to take revenge on me. Violet stared closely at my expression, as if she wouldn't stop until she saw a trace of pain or embarrassment on my face, but she was disappointed in the end. I just looked at her indifferently, without any emotion. On the wedding day, he told me that he regretted it and shouldn't have come to see me. I mentioned a lot of things from the past to him, and I couldn't help but my eyes turned red. He couldn't bear to see me cry, so when he wiped my tears for me, I kissed him. A gentle smile appeared on Violet's lips. He didn't reject me. Seeing that I still didn't react at all, the smile on Violet's lips gradually disappeared, and a gloomy look flashed in her eyes. Why? Suddenly, she lowered her head, and her shoulders seemed to tremble slightly. Asher and I have been together since high school. We had a relationship for over 10 years. We shared each other's most innocent times and accompanied each other through the toughest days. I once took 2 part-time jobs to buy him a gift, and he almost broke with his family for me. There was a trace of grief and indignation in her voice as if she was about to cry. Now, for you, after I made up my mind to let go of my own principles, he doesn't want to accept me anymore. How long have you known him? Her shrill voice attracted the attention of many people. You two got to know each other through a blind date. It was just a partnership for life. How could there be any real feelings? He just thinks you're suitable, that's all. How much do you like him? I've loved him for a whole 10 years. I didn't answer. Asher and my father probably thought the same way. That's why they chose the so-called true loves in their hearts time and time again. However, there's no standard to measure the depth of feelings. Who says the liking born out of being suitable isn't real liking? Who says the feelings in daily life aren't necessarily as precious as the passionate ones? This has never been a reason for them to play with and betray others' true feelings. Feeling unbearably bitter inside, I stood up and poured a cup of coffee over her head. The dark and sticky liquid flowed down her head and smeared all over her face. Everyone looked over in this direction. It seems you still don't understand. It was you who left him first, wasn't it? What right does the person who left first have to blame the one who didn't stay where they were? Besides, how dare you, who have no sense of shame or morality and seduced someone else's boyfriend, come to question me like this? Violet's face turned ashen. I smiled and suddenly asked, I heard that your company recently cooperated with the government on a project and decided to recommend you as the image spokesperson. Is that right? Violet was completely panicked now. What are you going to do? On my way to the airport, I sent the recording of my conversation with Violet to my best friend. Yes, I had recorded it. Fortunately, I had recorded it. I asked my best friend to sort out the evidence of the two of them having an affair in the car, the surveillance video of the hotel parking lot, and the video of our wedding, and send them all to Asher's and Violet's companies together. I had never thought of letting them off easily. The boarding announcement came on the radio. I seemed to see a familiar figure shuttling through the crowd, looking around constantly, and the anxiety in his eyes was clearly visible. It was Asher. I don't know if he sensed something, but he looked up and saw me. I locked eyes with him for 2 seconds and then went through the ticket check and boarded the plane. I saw Asher again half a year later. I heard from my best friend that after those pieces of evidence were sent, Violet was fired by her company. Since the project was directly linked to the government, she was basically blacklisted in that circle. It seemed that Asher had resigned, and no one knew where he had gone. Before going to the hotel to negotiate a cooperation with Titus, my father called me again. He had been diagnosed with a stroke, and his condition might get worse in the future. He hoped that I could go back to see him. I only replied, I'll go back during the spring festival. When I pushed open the door of the private room, I saw Asher sitting with the person in charge of the other company at the first sight. The sunlight was slanting in just right. He had lost a lot of weight and looked more composed than half a year ago, with a kind of understated restraint. At this moment, he was looking at me calmly. He had actually come to Suzhou. I walked over calmly with Titus, when ordering dishes, remembering the previous research, I ordered a lot of spicy dishes. The person in charge of the other company looked at me, and I was a bit puzzled. Don't you like spicy dishes? He took a look at Asher and smiled. Asher can't eat spicy food. If it's too spicy, he might even end up in the hospital. Let's take care of him. I also smiled and said okay. Halfway through, I went to the washroom. When I came out, as expected, I saw Asher leaning against the wall in the corridor. Arya, you haven't forgotten me. He stared into my eyes, and his brows and eyes were filled with indescribable emotions. You deliberately ordered a lot of spicy dishes. You're still angry with me. Although it seemed like a statement, he actually didn't sound very confident. His voice was very soft, as if he was deceiving himself. I didn't even have the desire to mock him. I said calmly, Asher, is this meaningful? We've broken up for half a year. Why do you still think that I must remember your preferences? Asher stared at me blankly, his jaw gradually tightening, and he remained silent, until my phone vibrated, and Titus asked me what was going on. I told him I'd be there soon. When I returned to my seat, Titus and I talked and interacted very harmoniously. In the past 6 months, we had been the best partners in the company. Later, my contact lens accidentally fell out. Titus hooked the gold-rimmed glasses on the bridge of his nose with his fingertip and naturally took them off with one hand and handed them to me, smiling, use mine for now. Anyway, it's not the first time. I could feel that there was a gaze fixed on us all the time. In the end, the business deal was successfully negotiated, and the person in charge of the other company was quite drunk. He even made a joke about Titus and me. There's something going on between you two. Titus and I were both taken aback and subconsciously looked at each other, then just smiled without saying anything. Now that he was obviously drunk, he wouldn't listen to any explanations, and maybe he would forget it all tomorrow, but in the eyes of others, it seemed like we were admitting it. Sorry. Asher suddenly stood up. Judging from his voice carefully, it seemed that he was still trembling a bit. I have something to do. I'll leave first. Just like after every business negotiation, Titus sent me home. The streetlights were casting shadows, and the night wind was a bit chilly. Titus put one hand in his pocket, turned his head to look at me, and asked, "Is he your ex-boyfriend?" I replied with a yes. "He looks like a decent person, but what he did was really despicable," Titus sighed. "I definitely don't want a boyfriend like him in the future." I burst out laughing. Yes, Titus, like me, liked men. While laughing, we had already reached downstairs of my house. Titus suddenly leaned closer, reached out to hold my face, and said, "Do you want to invite me upstairs to sit for a while?" Before I could say anything, Titus slightly moved his lips, and his warm breath blew on my earlobe. "Your ex-boyfriend is behind us." I was stunned. Titus just smiled, took my hand, and deliberately raised his voice, "We've negotiated the project. How are you going to reward me tonight?" I looked back. Asher was standing under the big tree, silently watching us. I withdrew my gaze and went upstairs with Titus. After that time, Asher came to see me several times, but I refused to see him and didn't say a word to him. Then he didn't come again. On New Year's Eve, I went back to my father's house. At the dinner table, my father didn't seem as seriously ill as he had said. My stepmother, who usually treated me indifferently, had an awkward and ingratiating smile on her face. My younger brother, who always liked to tease me, also lowered his head obediently and remained silent. There was another person at the dinner table. He was looking at me steadily, tapping the table gently with his long fingers from time to time, and there was a faint smile on his lips. Suddenly, my mind went blank for a moment, and I felt a bit dazed. "Why are you here?" My stepmother quickly stood up. "Your father had a stroke because something went wrong with the company. If it hadn't been for Asher's help with the capital turnover, your father couldn't have recovered so quickly." Then she looked at Asher again. "Asher, she's always been like this. Don't mind her." So that's how it was. It felt as if a huge stone was pressing on my heart, and my throat seemed to be blocked by wet cotton. I could hardly breathe. So, you didn't tell me anything and you even continued to pretend to be sick to trick me into coming back. It's not that you wanted to celebrate the new year with me, but that you wanted to sell your daughter off. Arya. My father seemed a bit flustered. Dad didn't mean that. Asher said he just wanted to find an opportunity to talk to you. I interrupted him. I don't want to see him at all. After he humiliated me in public on our wedding day, after he had an affair with his ex-girlfriend behind my back, after I had an abortion. I don't, not at all, want to see him. Not only Asher's face, but also my father's face turned deathly pale as I said these words. What happened to the child, Arya? I looked at him. Your daughter, after seeing the evidence of her boyfriend's affair, found out that she was pregnant. Then when she went to the hospital for an abortion, her boyfriend slapped her hard. My father froze completely. I smiled faintly. You see, you don't know anything at all. You've never cared about me as your daughter. After going downstairs, I sat on the bench in the community with a blank expression. I had already booked the ticket back to Suzhou. My father sent me many WeChat messages. He said that he was sorry for me. He said that he would find a way to pay back the money borrowed from Asher as soon as possible and wouldn't make things difficult for me anymore. He also said that it wasn't that he didn't care about me, but that every time he saw me, he would think of my mother. He felt sorry for her, so he subconsciously kept his distance from me, as if this way he wouldn't feel pain and guilt. He asked me to forgive him. I didn't reply. And I won't reply anymore. Suddenly, I felt like smoking. I took out a cigarette from my pocket, lit it, and took puffs one after another. Sorry. A deep voice came from above my head, filled with regret. You refused to see me before, so I looked up, calm. Why won't you leave me alone? Asher's lips trembled. He stared at me fixedly. Arya, I love you. But I don't love you anymore. Asher was silent for a moment. I've already checked. There's no possibility for you and Titus to be together. And you haven't dated any other boyfriends in the past 6 months either. I smiled sarcastically. So what? Asher also took out a cigarette and lit it. Half of his face was hidden in the pale blue smoke. After you moved away, I always thought of you. The first time we met, you came close to me and read the chess manual with me. At first, I thought you were just pretending and finding an excuse to keep in touch with me, and we both knew it without saying it. Later, as we got to know each other, I found out that you really understood Go and were quite good at it. Back then, under a comment on a social news item, I got into an argument with someone using a small account. ANID joined me, and we sent over 60 comments, giving examples, analyzing, and seeking the truth. Finally, we convinced that person. Later, we accidentally found out that the ID that helped me was also your small account. Later, we wanted to raise a cat, but we found out that both of us were allergic to cat hair, so we had to adopt one online virtually. Even when you said you wanted to name our future daughter, the names that popped out of our mouths were exactly the same. The more I thought about it, the clearer it became to me what I had missed. Asher stubbed out the cigarette and gave a bitter smile. It turns out that we were so compatible, in terms of hobbies, values, and all aspects. It was as if we were the other half of each other's souls. I was in a daze for a moment and suddenly my heart ached. The relationship with Violet was so deep. We often quarreled over trifles in life, and then made up quickly because we loved each other so much. So much so that I actually thought that life with you was too smooth and plain. I thought you were just suitable for me. In the night shrouded in excessive silence, only Asher's gradually changing breathing rhythm was distinct, one after another, heavy and deep. But how could it be just suitability? When we played chess together, you always complained that I had a bad temper and was easy to get angry. In fact, it was because you were so focused on the game that it seemed that nothing could attract your attention except the chessboard. Clearly, I also liked playing chess, but I couldn't help being jealous and couldn't help wanting to interrupt you. I just grabbed your hand and kissed you. Every Mid-Autumn Festival and New Year's Eve, you would be very uneasy because you had to go back to your father's house. Before, I would always accompany you back. That one time I was busy with something, and you went back alone. I was so worried that I couldn't sleep all night. As soon as I finished my work, I bought a plane ticket and rushed over. At that time, it seemed that you were writing in your diary and fell asleep lying on the table. You didn't send me a message to complain about your grievances, but my name was written all over the paper. At that moment, I told myself that I would protect you from grievances and harm for the rest of my life. People with incompatible personalities can fall in love and be together. We were so compatible from the beginning. How could there be no love, Arya? He called my name softly. Forgive me. Let's forget those bad things and start over, okay? I looked into his eyes. These words seemed to open a certain floodgate, and the emotions that had been suppressed for a long time surged in my chest and my throat became increasingly choked. I shook my head. It's too late. Is it because of Violet? A hint of panic flashed in Asher's eyes. He tremblingly held my hand. She and I are in the past. Maybe I hesitated and wavered before, but I will firmly choose you in the future. Looking at his helpless and humble appearance, my heart felt as if it was tightly grasped by a big hand. The past, the present, the good, the bad, memories quietly surged like a tide and drowned me. Why? You could love her wholeheartedly when you loved her. Why couldn't you love me wholeheartedly when you loved me? You asked me to forget those bad things, but I can't. Violet came to see me and told me that during the 10 years you were with her, you loved her unreservedly. Even when you broke up, you were both decent. You've always known that I wanted to have a home of my own. But on the day of our wedding, you cheated on me. Why did it have to be that day? Why did it have to be in our bridal chamber? You once promised my mother in front of her tombstone that you would love me well in the future. That day carried all my beautiful visions for the future life, but you tore it apart in a nearly cruel and bloody way, telling me that I actually wasn't worthy of being loved. Everything in front of me became blurred and I could no longer see his face clearly. You asked me why I didn't want to see you. Because whenever I see you, I'll think of how I was waiting for you expectantly at the wedding venue while you and Violet were doing shameful things in our wedding car and bridal chamber. I'll think of how our child was aborted because of your infidelity. The past scenes became clearer and the dull pain became even stronger and more surging. I closed my eyes. We named her that a year ago. May she be loved all her life and be as precious as a jewel. The moment she died, my heart for you died too. Asher squatted down, raised his hand to cover his face, and tears flowed out drop by drop from between his fingers. His shoulders slumped and kept trembling. I'm sorry. It seemed that these were the only 3 words he could say. My cell phone rang. The driver I called had arrived. I stood up and said the last words to him before leaving. Violet said that when people meet through a blind date, they're just living together as partners. How much affection can there be? But I once loved you plainly, single-mindedly, and sincerely. I don't want to see you ever again. Epilogue. After that, I never saw Asher again. I only heard that later, he invested in business and put all his family fortune into it. As a result, the project failed. He also got into trouble because of tax issues and was imprisoned for 2 years. As for Violet, my best friend told me that she got back together with her fiancé. After getting married, she found out that her husband was domestically violent and their life was in chaos. I heard that they even went to the police station several times after getting into fights, but all of this has nothing to do with me. When I first returned to Suzhou, my father often sent me messages, asking clumsily and ingratiatingly about my work situation and how I was doing. I directly blocked him. Until the anniversary of my mother's death, when I went to sweep her tomb, I saw that it was piled with eustomas, which were her favorite flowers when she was alive. There were still drops of water on the petals. Obviously, the person who came to see her had just left not long ago. At the same time, I received a strange text message. Dad knows you don't want to see me, so I left before you came. I was stunned for a few seconds and then I took away the eustomas expressionlessly. It was so ridiculous. When my mother was alive, he had never sent her flowers. After my mother died and her ashes were buried in Suzhou according to her last wish, in these years, his family was happy, but he had never come to see her. Now, apart from self-moving, what's the point? Oh, it'll also dirty my mother's eyes. After going home, I sat on the sofa for a long time and then went to my room. I opened the locked drawer and took out my mother's diary when she was alive. It recorded what absurd and disgusting roles my father and his first love played in the last days of my mother's life and how they pushed her into a deeper abyss of pain. My father didn't know that my mother had already found out that he was cheating. He didn't know why his wife's last wish was that she must divorce him and be buried stubbornly in her hometown. And this diary was given to me later by my mother's best friend at that time. My father didn't know about it either. You see, he seems to know nothing. I took pictures of the contents of the diary one by one and sent them to him one by one. Then I blocked him again. A few months later, when I went on a business trip there, my younger brother actually came to find me. He seemed to have changed into a different person. His plump cheeks were pale and thin, his expression was in a daze, and his clothes were loose. He no longer had the arrogant look of the past. Dad went crazy that night for some reason. He slapped himself hard on the face crazily and smashed everything in the house. He kept crying and shouting a person's name, saying things like, "I thought you didn't love me," and "I thought you insisted on being buried in Suzhou because the person you liked was also in Suzhou." He also wanted to divorce Mom. Mom didn't agree, so he pushed her. Mom's face fell on the fragments of the vase on the floor, and a lot of blood flowed out. Then Mom went crazy too. She said that Dad had been lying to her all along, saying things like, "So you've fallen in love with her too?" Then she laughed loudly and looked at Dad with a terrifying look. She also said that she had deceived him, that she had been in contact with her first love all along, and she said that I'm not Dad's child. My younger brother suddenly burst into tears, crying despairingly, his shoulders shaking. I was slightly stunned. So my father wasn't my stepmother's first love either. Sister, Dad really had a stroke this time. He's paralyzed in bed all day long and can't speak. Every time I go to see him, he just stares at me. I'm so scared. Mom doesn't come home anymore. Sister, Dad took all the family's money to pay back my brother-in-law. Seriously, he promised to buy me basketball shoes but hasn't bought them yet. If I don't wear them to school next week, my classmates will surely laugh at me to death. He looked at me hopefully. Sister, could you lend me 5,000 yuan? Finally, the security guard came to drive him away and he left. As for the 5,000 yuan, of course, I didn't lend it to him. He's not my real younger brother now. The end. In the 3rd year of my marriage to Cassius, he threw his underwear at me. "You're not a young girl anymore. Why are you still wearing this style? Do you think I'd be interested?" I was puzzled and said, "Really? But I remember last time when I wore it, you had a pretty big reaction." The air suddenly went quiet. Cassius crushed the wine glass in his hand. "Serafina, make it clear. Who the hell did you wear it for?" It seemed that my husband had another quarrel with his girlfriend again. It was already 1 o'clock in the morning. Instead of going to bed, he was standing on the balcony in his pajamas with a cigarette in his mouth. The whole bedroom was filled with his angry shouts. I sighed, took off my earplugs, and walked up behind him. "Cassius." Unexpectedly, he had the speakerphone on, and my voice drifted into the ears of his girlfriend on the other end of the phone. "Cassius, why is there a woman beside you?" "Ophelia, let me explain." "Explain what?" "Let's break up, you scumbag." After saying that, she hung up the phone neatly. Cassius was powerless but furious and threw his mobile phone. I blinked and said with a smile, "Go to bed early. Staying up late is bad for your health." "It's bad for my health." Cassius glanced at me sideways and vented all the anger he got from his girlfriend on me. "Serafina, you did it on purpose just now, didn't you?" "I? Don't explain. Don't you think I don't know what's on your mind?" He stretched out a hand in front of me and turned his face away. "I'm telling you, I only have Ophelia in my heart. Don't think I can't see through your little tricks." The angrier he got as he spoke, and he picked up his coat and walked towards the door. I quickly asked, "Where are you going?" Without looking back, he said, "I'm going to Haishur. I want to explain to Ophelia face to face." "Then, how many days will you be gone?" He sneered. "You won't see me for the next half a month." "Humph, this is your punishment." He slammed the door shut. I stood there and couldn't help laughing out loud. All my sleepiness was gone. Then I took out my mobile phone and sent a message to the person whose note was, "On call. Baby, see you at the usual place tomorrow." The usual place was the largest five-star hotel in the city. After it was over, I rested my head on Axel's muscular chest and listened to his strong heartbeat. He muttered with a bit of dissatisfaction, "Now that you've finished your work, you finally have time to see me?" I felt a bit guilty and stopped my hand that was stroking his chest muscles. In the dim light, his long eyelashes fluttered and he looked incredibly handsome. Feeling a stir in my heart, I took out my mobile phone. "Is there anything you want recently? I'll buy it for you." His fingers with well-defined joints lifted my chin. "You? I'm asking if there's anything you want." A naughty smile curved his lips, but his eyes looked innocent. "I've already said it." By the time I realized what he meant, he had already lifted the goose-down quilt in the hotel and covered our heads with it. During college, people around described Axel as having a face that was destined to have many descendants. I lowered my head and looked at his straight brow bone and nose bridge. Destined to have many descendants indeed. It was really true. After making this comment, everyone would sigh in unison. Such a handsome guy. What a pity that he's a gigolo. Axel usually dressed simply and it could be seen that he came from a poor family. But once, someone saw him getting out of a luxury car. The driver was a mature and beautiful woman over 30 years old. So rumors about Axel spread. My roommate's sighs were not because of the declining social morality that male college students became gigolos for money. Instead, it was because the rich woman wasn't them. But I was happy. I had money. However, before I could be happy for 2 seconds, my father called me. He asked me to go home for a blind date. For people of our background, we could never make our own decisions about marriage. Arranged marriages were the norm. I had been the eldest daughter of the Serafina family for 20 years and it was fair that I should contribute to the family. My love was nipped in the bud before it even sprouted. After having afternoon tea with Cassius twice, I became his bride. But on our wedding day, he didn't even enter our bridal chamber. "To be honest, Serafina, I'm not interested in you at all. You've got the position of Mrs. Cassius. You win. As for anything else, don't even think about it." He threw me a black card and drove away while talking on the phone. I heard him call the person on the other end of the phone baby. After that, Cassius and I lived our own lives. The difference was that he played around openly, while I had to play around secretly. There was no way around it. Society was always harsher on girls. Cassius said he'd be gone for half a month, but unexpectedly, he came back in less than a week. When I got his call, I had just been worn out by Axel and was feeling sleepy. Axel took the mobile phone on the bedside table and asked me, "Who is human decoration?" I woke up with a start. My marriage with Cassius existed in name only. What else could it be if not a human decoration? A decoration named husband. Caught off guard, I hurriedly explained, "A toy seller." After turning down the volume, I answered the phone. Cassius was impatient in his tone. "Why did it take you so long to answer?" I didn't answer but asked instead, "What's the matter?" He gave me an address and asked me to go there to find him. I took a look at Axel's beautiful shark muscles and said with difficulty, "It's so late. I don't think I'll go." But I don't know if Cassius had taken the wrong medicine or what, but he insisted strongly. After making up an excuse casually, I left the hotel. When I arrived at the club, after seeing that familiar, young and beautiful face, I finally knew what Cassius was up to. The girl's name was Ophelia. She was Cassius' current girlfriend, a junior student at the dance academy. When Cassius chased her, the commotion was so big that even I, his legitimate wife, had heard about it. But now, the girl had red eyes, pouted her lips, and sat in the farthest position from Cassius in the private room. Seeing me coming, Cassius looked at me affectionately, which made my skin crawl. "Honey, you're here." Then he kicked his good-for-nothing friends beside him. "Your sister-in-law is here. Get lost." "Sure. Sister-in-law, please take a seat." His friends left quickly. Ophelia withdrew her gaze, and her eyes became even redder. Cassius was looking at me with his eyes, but his peripheral vision was always glancing elsewhere. I sat down silently, forced a smile, and said in a voice that only the two of us could hear, "Cassius, you've gone a bit too far." He thoughtfully poured me a glass of wine. "Didn't you always complain that I didn't take you to meet my friends? Well, here's your chance today." He was referring to the time when we just got married. At first, I did want to live a good life with him. It was true that our marriage was an arranged one, but I didn't want to treat marriage as a joke. But Cassius sneered, "I have a female companion. If you go there, where will she go?" I understood and never had that daydream again. Cassius played the role of a good husband for the whole night. When he blocked the wine for me again, Ophelia finally couldn't hold it anymore and wiped her tears and ran away. The mobile phone made a ding-dong sound. Cassius picked it up and his face turned pale. Then he chased after her immediately. As soon as he left, the lively private room fell into an eerie silence. I slowly peeled peanuts. "Why are you all looking at me?" "Keep going." Only then did they look away, with strange expressions on their faces. It wasn't the first or second time that Cassius had slapped me in the face in public. It happened so many times that I was numb and couldn't even feel the pain. This little episode passed quickly, and the private room became lively again. Axel sent me a photo. "Didn't you say you were working overtime? Are you playing with me?" I don't know which mutual friend had posted on Moments and had also taken a picture of me in it. Among a group of strange people, I was sitting in the corner quietly drinking wine, looking out of place. I was glad that the person didn't take Cassius in the picture either. I thought Axel had come to scold me. But he sent a message: "There are peaches in the fruit plate. Remember not to touch them. You're allergic." My heart softened instantly. The hole that Cassius had just stabbed in my heart seemed to be filled up all of a sudden. Courtesy demands reciprocity. I transferred money, trying to fill up his bank card. Axel replied quickly, "What do you mean? Are you treating your boyfriend like a gigolo?" I really liked his tone. He could always give me his client the best experience. I wanted to be his client for the rest of my life. I made up my mind to get a divorce. But when my father knew my idea, he was silent. He said that the company hadn't been operating well in recent years. He explained the pros and cons to me in detail. Finally, he said that the company needed the investment from the Cassius family. He also said that when my father-in-law played golf with him last time, he mentioned something about having grandchildren. Between my family and love, I abandoned love again. It was just that this time, since I had experienced love before, it was even more painful to abandon it. I transferred a breakup fee to Axel, just saying that I was tired of it. Then I reluctantly blocked him. However, I didn't expect that Axel would come to my house. On the day I saw Axel, I was talking about business with someone in a restaurant near my home. Yes, I had taken over the company. I had calculated that with my father's business ability, in the next few years, I might be forced to have a third child. My client was the young master of the Adelaide family in the capital. Although our Serafina family could be considered wealthy in the capital, we couldn't even touch the threshold of the Adelaide family. It was a pleasant surprise that he accepted my invitation this time. I took out my lipstick to touch up my makeup and waited nervously for the young master's arrival. Who knew that instead of the young master, I waited for Axel? I hadn't seen him for a few days, but his figure was still as good as before. His chest was still so muscular, and his waist was still so slender. As I looked at him, tears uncontrollably flowed from the corners of my mouth. He thoughtfully wiped them away for me. But the words he said were not thoughtful at all. "A week ago, you were sweet-talking and saying you'd buy me a car, and now you want to break up. Are you schizophrenic?" My heart suddenly ached. I knew that he came not because he was reluctant to part with our relationship, but because he was reluctant to part with my money. I said expressionlessly, "You don't need to remind me. I'll fulfill what I promised you." But my actions still betrayed my emotions. I didn't hold it steady, and the coffee in the cup spilled all over me. The young master would be here soon, and I couldn't meet him like this. Fortunately, my home was nearby, so I hurried home to change clothes. Who knew that Axel followed me? I was changing clothes in the bedroom, and he stood by and watched without any scruples. I was too lazy to bother with him and just let him be. Serafina, don't you think you owe me an explanation? The decoration on the clothes was complicated, and I couldn't fasten the buttons after several attempts. Axel came over to help me. In the mirror, I was covered by his tall figure. The delicate buttons became like instruments of torture in his hands. I coughed lightly. Don't fasten it so high. He looked at me silently. I was quite helpless and said, I don't think I owe you any explanation. I've already said everything that needed to be said, haven't I? His face darkened in an instant. His lips moved as if he was about to speak. At this moment, there was a rustling sound coming from outside the door. Axel was startled and subconsciously looked towards the door. My face turned deathly pale at that very moment. Sure enough, Cash's voice came from the living room. Honey. Honey? Axel tightened his grip on my collar a bit more. So you do have someone else. However, I couldn't care less about that. I looked around quickly. Finally, I opened the wardrobe door and was about to stuff Axel inside. I prayed secretly in my heart that Cassius would never come into my bedroom. Axel stood still. Why should I hide? It's him who should hide, right? I was so anxious that I almost called him ancestor. Honey, are you there? Cassius' voice was getting closer and closer, and my heart was beating faster and faster. She's not here after all. The sound of footsteps stopped abruptly. Isn't it better if she is? That would be more exciting. I recognized that it was Ophelia's voice. Cassius cursed under his breath, you little vixen. Don't beg for mercy later. Then, the sounds of fabric rubbing and saliva exchanging came in one after another. Even Axel was stunned. He looked at me with a complicated look in his eyes. Are you married? With the fact right in front of us, I didn't deny it and nodded. His gaze became fierce, and he suddenly pinched my chin. Hurry up and divorce him. I won't be the other man. I didn't say yes or no and pushed him away. Let me out. Are you going to catch them in the act? I gave him a look. How could I have the right to do that now? No, I'm going back to the restaurant. I have an appointment with someone. Axel was stunned when he heard this. He looked away. What's the rush? Maybe the other person has something urgent and cancelled it. I found it funny. As the young master of a wealthy family, how could he cancel an appointment so easily? However, when I opened my phone to check, I actually received a message from the young master's secretary. The meeting was cancelled. Axel pinched my phone with 2 fingers and threw it aside casually. All right, can we talk about the divorce now? I remembered what my father had said. The company needed investment. Cash's father also wanted a grandson. But I didn't plan to tell Axel about these things. Because it didn't fit my usual image of a domineering patron. Forget about it. I can't get divorced. Axel's defenses were broken. He's like that, and you still won't divorce him? Serafina, I never knew you were such a love-struck fool before. A love-struck fool? During the few seconds of my silence, he took it as my acquiescence. He grabbed my neck viciously and kissed me. By the time I came to my senses, half of my clothes had already been taken off. I pushed him away abruptly. Where is this? Are you crazy? He turned a deaf ear to me. Since I couldn't beat him, I had no choice but to give in. I bit my lip tightly, looked up at the ceiling, and didn't let out a single sound. But I could hear the continuous sounds coming from the living room. What a mess. It's really chaotic. It's almost like a pot of porridge boiling over. When I woke up again, it was already completely dark. Axel was lying beside me, playing with my hair. I remembered what had happened a few hours ago and suddenly jumped up from the bed. But then Axel pushed me down again. Your husband has already left with his mistress. He curled his lips, looking rather disdainful. I really don't know what you see in him. He's not even half as good as me. Can he satisfy you? I looked at him and said, even if he's not even 1/10 as good as you, I still can't divorce him. How could I explain it to him? Love is the most luxurious luxury for me, something I can't afford, but my caged bird clearly didn't understand this. He turned his face away and clenched his teeth. Then he got out of bed silently, put on his clothes and pants. His clothes were so torn and loose that they were almost unwearable, and only his good looks could make up for it. I couldn't bear it. Don't wear these. I'll find you another piece of clothing. But he suddenly got angry. I'd rather be naked than wear his clothes. With that, he really took off his shirt and left my house bare-chested. I remembered the car purchase and transferred some money to him. He replied to me with a haughty and cold question mark. I was about to reply, but as soon as the message was sent, I found that I had been blocked. I looked at the ceiling and let out a long sigh. Maybe it's better this way. But not long after, my phone rang again. On call. After such a long ordeal today, you'd better be more restrained. I typed a reply, but was blocked again. Fine, fine, fine. I quickly understood the hidden meaning in Axel's words. Before taking a bath in the evening, I found that several of my express deliveries had disappeared all of a sudden. Inside were the new lace camisole nightgowns I had just bought. It was obvious who the culprit was. Helplessly, I could only change into the ones I usually wore. As soon as I came out of the bathroom, I met Cassius' eyes. He looked me up and down from top to bottom, and said in a sarcastic tone, "You're not a young girl anymore. Still wearing this style. Do you think I'll be interested?" After saying that, he turned his head and whispered maliciously in Ophelia's ear beside him, "It would suit you better if you wore it." Only then did I notice that Ophelia had also followed me in. She was wearing my slippers, looking completely at ease, as if she were the mistress of this house. Hearing Cassius' words, Ophelia's fair and delicate face turned red. She playfully punched Cassius on the chest. "What are you talking about? You're so annoying." I was really afraid that they would start making out in front of me, probably because my head was dizzy from the steam in the bathroom. I stumbled over my words and subconsciously said, "Really?" But I remember that when I wore it last time, he had a pretty big reaction. My legs also had a big reaction. They were shaking all day long the next day. As soon as I finished speaking, the air went silent. Cassius' eyes widened, and the glass wine glass in his hand shattered with a crash. "Serafina, make it clear. Who the hell else did you wear it for?" The red wine flowed down his fingertips and soaked the creamy white carpet, and my head was buzzing. There were only 2 words in my mind. "It's over this time, my father's company probably couldn't be saved." Ophelia very considerately took out a handkerchief to wipe Cassius' hands, but he pushed her away. Cassius stared at me closely and asked again. "Tell me, who was that person?" Ophelia looked at Cassius and then at me, with a cold glint in her eyes. After a while, she tugged at Cassius' sleeve. "Brother, ignore her. She's just trying to make you angry on purpose. She's a married woman, old and ugly. Who could possibly be interested in her?" Cassius probably thought what she said was quite reasonable, and his tightly furrowed brows gradually relaxed. He looked at me and clicked his tongue softly. "How many times has this happened? You just love playing these vulgar tricks. Isn't it good to be Mrs. Cassius quietly? When have I ever shortchanged you on benefits?" Ophelia was unhappy. "Brother, haven't you ever thought about divorcing her?" Cassius stroked her hair as if stroking a kitten. "She was chosen by the old man. It won't be easy to explain if we divorce. I've given you all my heart. What else is there to argue about?" Ophelia still pouted. "Who knows if what you say is true or false?" Cassius' voice lowered. "You'll know soon." Ophelia bit her lip and gave him a shy and angry look. "You're so annoying." They left affectionately. I finally let out a sigh of relief. Cassius was right. As long as I quietly played the role of a decoration and helped him deal with his family members, I wouldn't lack benefits. The next day, I received a call from my father. He was very excited and said that with the investment from the Cassius family, the company's capital chain had been revitalized. Cassius also sent me a message, which was very brief, just 3 words: "Stop causing trouble." I couldn't be happy. The investment from the Cassius family was just a temporary solution. To save the company, we still had to rely on ourselves. I tried to contact the young master again, but this time, I don't know what got into him. He always refused my invitations. I thought that I hadn't offended him. So one day, I sneaked into the Adelaide family building quietly. As long as I could meet the young master, I would always find a way to persuade him again. Sure enough, the young master was in the office. He had his back to me, dressed in a suit and tie, with broad shoulders, a narrow waist, and his hair neatly combed. Somehow, I felt that this back view was very familiar. The sound from his mobile phone playing aloud reached outside the door. I listened carefully for a while. He was actually listening to an audiobook. And it was the kind about forcibly taking another man's wife. TSK. He really has a heavy taste. After standing there for a while, I left without looking back. Judging from what I saw, this young master didn't seem very smart. Cooperating with him probably wouldn't bring a bright future for the Serafina family. However, to my surprise, a few days later, the young master actually came to me on his own initiative. This time, there was an official invitation, so I didn't climb through the fire escape again. Instead, I took the elevator up openly. After knocking on the door, I walked into the office unexpectedly. Instead of seeing the young master, I saw a woman. The woman was wearing a pure white professional suit, looking beautiful and capable. The moment she raised her head, I froze on the spot. I knew this woman. She was Axel's patron during his college days. "Sit," the woman said, looking at me with the air of a hostess. Mr. Adelaide had a son and a daughter. So, the woman in front of me was the eldest daughter of the Adelaide family, Adelaide. I sat down in a daze. At this moment, the door opened again. I almost spilled coffee all over myself while holding the cup. The person in front of me, dressed in a suit and looking like an elite. Who else could it be but Axel? Axel strode in, followed by an assistant who was bowing and scraping. He glanced at me and quickly looked away, then walked past me without looking sideways. Then he sat down beside Adelaide. A position that was far beyond the normal social distance. Besides being shocked, I felt a bit uncomfortable in my heart. Just a few days ago, Axel was still pestering me to ask me to divorce, acting as if he couldn't live without me. But in the blink of an eye, he was involved with his former patron. Men, none of them are good. Adelaide didn't notice the undercurrents in the room. She answered a phone call, stood up and said to Axel, "I have something to do. I'll leave first. I won't be back for dinner tonight. Tell Mom and Dad." "Got it, sis." I suddenly looked up. "Sis?" I choked on my coffee and coughed violently. Axel sat opposite me with his arms folded, looking at me silently. "Tissue, cough cough." Axel's expression became a bit strange. Eventually, he deigned to push a box of tissues over. While wiping my face, I looked at him and couldn't help asking, "Was that your sister just now?" He raised his eyebrows and replied with a reserved syllable, "Mm." Axel still had a calm look on his face. "I took my mother's surname. Is that not okay?" I was left speechless. "Okay, of course it's okay. Why wouldn't it be?" I remembered the bits and pieces of my past interactions with Axel. Every time I gave him a gift, he always had a cold look, as if he looked down on them. That time, I secretly laughed at him for pretending. Now it seemed that those things were really insignificant in front of the young master of the Adelaide family. Moreover, he didn't have the slightest obsequiousness of a kept man. Instead, he often regarded himself as my boyfriend. Coincidentally, I fell for this the most and even praised his strong professional ability to please his benefactor. I took a sip of coffee and decided to keep this secret to myself. After finishing the coffee, I started to talk to him about cooperation. Axel looked at me and snorted lightly. "There are thousands of people who want to cooperate with the Adelaide family. Who are you to me? Why should I choose you? This bastard is really vindictive. However, I can bend and stretch. President Axel, it was my fault before. If you're really angry, I can kneel down and apologize to you." Axel frowned as he looked at me. He somehow got angry. "What's the use of an apology? I want you." I pointed at myself. "Me?" As if he thought of something, he cleared his throat and looked away. "You, divorce him." I couldn't believe my ears. "If I divorce my husband, you'll cooperate with me?" With such a great merit of cooperating with the Adelaide family, let alone getting a divorce. Even if I wanted to reach for the sky, my father would only stand below and applaud. Happiness came so suddenly. I was stunned on the spot and couldn't say a word. What, you don't want to? Yes, I'm more than willing. I was just about to speak when Axel clapped his hands with a cold face. Now you don't have a choice even if you don't want to. I turned my head following Axel's gaze. And then I saw Cassius coming out from somewhere. Serafina, let's get divorced. He said that. I was startled and took several steps back while covering my chest. In Axel's eyes, this appearance of mine seemed to be one of being heartbroken and incredulous. His face suddenly darkened, and he grabbed my arm. Didn't you hear what he just said? Why are you still being stubborn? Before I could answer, Cassius couldn't help screaming. Serafina, you're going to kill me. Do you know that if you don't divorce me, this crazy President Axel will withdraw the investment from the Cassius family? You should have some sense even if you're a love-struck fool. After saying the last sentence, Axel gave him a sharp glare. Cassius immediately fell silent. I felt that I needed to confirm. Well, what will happen if the investment is withdrawn? Cassius was about to scream again. After glancing at Axel, he held it back with great effort. He said in a solemn tone, the Cassius family might go bankrupt. I gasped in shock and opened my eyes wide in disbelief. Cassius looked at me, his eyes turning red. His chest heaved violently, like a bull in the arena that could hardly hold itself back, and Axel leaned against the desk, looking at me coldly. After a long silence, he walked up to me and pinched my chin. You know I'm not a patient person. You don't want to make me angry, right? I was stunned for a second. I felt that these lines were strangely familiar, as if I had heard them somewhere before. Soon, I remembered. It was the lines from the novel played on his phone outside the door of this office. I was a bit speechless, but still raised my head, wiped away the non-existent tears, and looked at Axel pitifully. President Axel, all this happened so suddenly. Could you let me think about it for a while? Cassius looked at me, his eyes almost popping out. What is there to think about? But Axel interrupted him. Okay. He said through gritted teeth. Axel's methods were really impressive. In just a few days, the stock price of the Cassius family's group dropped again and again. Soon it fell to an all-time low. Cassius was pacing back and forth in the living room like a headless fly, and his fingernails were bitten ragged. Serafina, tell me yourself, what on earth do you want to do? I immediately squeezed out some tears and looked at him pitifully. Cassius, you were the one who said that as long as I behaved myself, you wouldn't abandon me. He took a deep breath, turned his head, revealing his swollen right cheek and dark eye circles. Serafina, you should understand the principle that things change. Loving someone isn't like what you're doing. Loving someone means letting go. If the stock of the Cassius family keeps dropping like this, my father will beat me with family rules. Can't you feel sorry for me? I looked at him and blinked my eyes. Cassius added, that Axel forced me to divorce you. He must have taken a fancy to you. His conditions are no worse than mine. Just go with him. I still didn't say anything. He wiped his face and sighed. Blame me. I'm too charming. At this time, his cell phone rang. I noticed keenly that the caller was Ophelia. Unexpectedly, in the face of this so-called true love, Cassius didn't show any of his usual tenderness and consideration. How dare you ask me why I stopped your card? Don't you know how much money you spend in a day? What, is my family going to go bankrupt? Don't you dare say another word, you bitch. No, Ophelia, why didn't I realize you were so vain before? I got up from the sofa, stretched myself, took a box of fresh strawberries from the fridge, and walked leisurely towards the room while eating them. On the eve of the Cassius family's group going bankrupt, I finally gave in. There was no other reason. Divorce involves property division. If Cassius really went bankrupt, where would I get the money to divide? Maybe I would even have to put in more money. After hearing me nod, the dejected look on Cassius' face disappeared completely, and his dull eyes became bright. He was trembling as he picked up the phone to call the lawyer Axel threw over a divorce agreement. No need to call. There's a ready-made one here. Cassius took it and opened it to take a look. The smile froze on his face. Why is the postmarital property divided into 70% for her and 30% for me? President Axel, do you think this contract needs to be redrafted? Redraft what redraft? I slapped the table and almost jumped up from the sofa. They both looked over at me. I quickly pinched my thigh and looked at Cassius with teary eyes. Great, Cassius, I knew it. You really can't bear to part with me. Axel ground his teeth and turned to look at Cassius. Really, President Cassius? Cassius shuddered and quickly picked up the signature pen on the table at lightning speed. He signed his name with a few strokes. I had to follow him and picked up the pen as well, signed my name, then covered my face and lowered my head, my shoulders shaking. I thought about all the sad things in my life before I managed not to laugh out loud. Oh my, who would understand? Now I'm really rich. Cassius lost more than half of his wealth but still left happily with the divorce agreement in his hands. I also giggled foolishly. Halfway through laughing, I couldn't laugh anymore, because when I turned my head, I saw Axel staring at me gloomily. I quickly said, I can explain. Listen to me explain. Halfway through my words, I was scooped up by Axel around my waist. He kicked open the door of the lounge next door like a bandit and threw me onto the bed. When his warm and elastic body covered mine, I almost couldn't hold back a satisfied sigh. Didn't you say you wanted to explain? Now you can explain. Axel lowered his head to look at me and said maliciously. But I shook my head and pressed the back of his head and kissed him. You know, an angry Axel had a unique charm. The misunderstanding was cleared up. In the following days, I finally lived a shameless and unrestrained cohabitation life with Axel openly. One day, as soon as I got off work, I saw his car parked at the entrance of the company. Oh, President Axel has come to pick you up again. You two have such a good relationship. I nodded to my subordinates and then got into the car. At this time, out of the corner of my eye, I caught sight of two familiar figures not far away. It was Cassius and Ophelia. Different from their usual positions, this time Cassius was standing right in front of Ophelia. And the one Ophelia was clinging to affectionately was another man. Who is he? Cassius asked the question that I also wanted to ask. Ophelia said righteously, can't you tell? This is my new boyfriend. Cassius got angry. Damn it. How dare you cheat on me? Ophelia glared at him. Hey, don't talk nonsense. When did I cheat on you? Didn't I tell you that if you didn't buy me that bag, we'd break up? Cassius was so angry that his chest heaved violently. Bitch. Everything you said before was a lie. What bullshit true love. You just loved my money. Ophelia shouted back without showing any weakness. What else would I want from you if not your money? Your old age? Your 2.5 minutes each time? It was the rush hour after work, and many people on the road looked over when they heard the noise. Hearing Ophelia's words, they all couldn't help looking Cassius up and down. Of course, mainly looking at the lower part. Cassius' face turned green and then white. Unable to bear it any longer, he gave Ophelia a hard slap. The three of them quickly got into a fight. You pulled my hair, and I kicked you in the crotch. I watched with a sigh and shook my head. A big hand stretched out from behind and turned my head back. Who allowed you to stare at other men for so long? Do you still have feelings for him? I sighed, reached out my hand to grope in his pocket, took out his cell phone and took a look. Sure enough, a novel was playing on the screen again. It had only been a few days since my first marriage ended when Axel dragged me to talk about getting married for the second time. Naturally, there was no problem on my parents' side. They were rather traditional. When I divorced Cassius back then, they were really unhappy. Later, when they learned that I was with Axel, they were almost overjoyed. I asked Axel a bit nervously, will your parents agree? The threshold of the Adelaide family was too high. My family's status was far from being able to match it. Not to mention that he was getting married for the first time while I was on my second marriage. I couldn't persuade him otherwise, and in the end, I followed him to the Adelaide family. I had thought that what was waiting for me would be something like, take this check and leave my son. But unexpectedly, Mrs. Adelaide was extremely warm and friendly. At the dinner table, she kept putting food in my bowl, and all the good things on the table were put into my bowl by her. She also took my hand and asked me excitedly when I would get engaged to Axel, with a glint in her eyes. I was afraid that they didn't know about my situation, so I tactfully mentioned that I was divorced. However, Mrs. Adelaide clapped her hands excitedly and said, "Second marriage is good. People in second marriages know how to care for others." I ate my fill, took some gifts, and even set the wedding date with Axel. I felt a bit dazed when I left. Axel held the steering wheel and said calmly, "I've never had a woman by my side before. They all thought I was gay." After a long silence, I slowly gave him a thumbs up. In the following month, I was busy preparing for the wedding. I didn't expect that Cassius would call me late at night. He asked me what I was doing. I didn't feel convenient to tell him what I was doing, because Axel was standing in front of me with a bunch of camisole nightgowns in his arms, asking me to try them on one by one for him. Yes, these nightgowns were the ones he took away from my house back then. I didn't expect that after such a long time, he still hadn't thrown them away. On the other end of the phone, Cassius was still chattering nonstop. "Serafina, I heard that Axel is about to get engaged. Now that he has a fiancée, his family definitely won't tolerate you. Come back to me. I was so blind before that I couldn't see the person who truly loved me. This time, I will surely cherish you." "Me?" Axel stroked his chin and looked me up and down. "Let's choose this nightgown. This style suits you best." His voice drifted to the other end of the phone. Cassius was silent for a long time and suddenly seemed to come to his senses. He muttered, "You said before that you had worn it for someone else." "It's true," he suddenly shouted. "Serafina, we hadn't divorced at that time. How dare you cheat on me?" Axel took the phone from my hand. "Ex-husband, why are you calling my fiancée in the middle of the night? Don't you know she's very busy now?" There was silence on the other end of the phone, and then Cassius hung up with a snap. Axel casually threw the phone aside, then leaned down and said, "Remember to turn it on silent mode next time. I don't want to be disturbed at a time like this." It was another sleepless night. Extra story: in the third month after marriage, Axel finally found out that he had once been regarded as a gigolo by Serafina. Here's how it happened. One day, he received an express delivery. It was the custom-made jewelry that Serafina had promised to give him half a year ago. There was also a copy of The Guide to the Top 10 Caged Birds attached inside. Axel thought for a moment and understood something. On this day, he took Serafina, who had just got off work, to a hotel. It was the same hotel where they used to fool around often. On the way, the more he thought about it, the more he realized something. Other people's dating places were like cinemas, yachts, tourist attractions. But his were always hotels, hotels, hotels. Serafina didn't know what was going on yet. When she arrived at the familiar luxury suite, she was quite excited. Axel, however, wasn't happy. He himself had become the other man to get into this relationship. He was afraid that Serafina would find other men. That's what he thought, and he asked her about it. Serafina blushed and said, "How could that be possible? No one else has as good a figure and looks as you do." Axel looked down at his abdominal muscles. That made sense. He would maintain these well. He wouldn't give anyone else a chance. Having said that, punishment was still necessary. He was the young master of the Adelaide family. How could he bear being regarded as a gigolo by his own woman? After reading another novel, he began to punish Serafina severely. When it was just getting light, Serafina was too tired to move even a finger. Her eyelids were drooping, but after a while, thinking of something, she immediately got out of bed. She took a look at the bathroom where the sound of running water could be heard. Then she picked up Axel's phone and uninstalled the Rotten Tomatoes app. The end.